Right, this is where I've actually numbered the block for when I put the pistons in, makes it a little easier. If I just turn them over so you can see. And I've numbered 1, 2, 3, 4. See, that's the front of the engine. And then if we turn back onto the other side, and I've labelled 5, 6, 7 and 8. So when we drop the pistons in, we don't have any problems. We know which one goes in which hole. Right, I've fitted, right, this is going to be piston to conrod assembly. I've already fitted the circular retaining pin for the little end in one end. It's not the easiest of jobs to do. You end up galling the piston a little bit, well I do. Some going quite easy. That one was a very difficult one. This one went in very, very easy. There's plenty of videos on YouTube showing various ways of doing it. So the next job then is to assemble the piston, little end and conrod. Now it's important that everything is done in the right order to go into the engine, as it's easy to put wrong pistons wrong way round, conrods wrong way round. Now, again, plenty of videos on this, but I'll run through quickly what I've got. If you look at a conrod, you'll find on the big end you've got a chamfer on one side and no chamfer on the other side. It's important that the chamfer goes towards the crank end and the non-chamfer butts up against the non-chamfer of the other conrod. So it's non-chamfer to non-chamfer. So I hope that makes sense. That's the first thing to bear in mind. So what I've done here is, I'll just bring the camera around so you can see it. Just lay them out a bit better. Right, I've laid this out so that's the front of the engine is up there, and this is effectively looking down on top of the engine. So 1 and 5 butt together with the chamfers on the outside, 2 and 6, 3 and 7 and 4 and 8, because Ford engines are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4 and then 5, 6, 7, 8. So conrods are laid out in the correct position. Right, we seem to have a continuity error. The video I should be showing now didn't get recorded, so I've already gone ahead and fitted the pistons to the rods. So what I was about to explain was, if you take, for example, number 4, and if you turn it over, you'll see that the cutouts, when it's loaded into the engine, the cutouts face the centre of the engine. And ditto on the other side, which is number 8. So again, when that goes into the engine, as you can see, the cutouts for the valves face to the inside. And you can see I've put arrows, etc. on the pistons so I know which way in they go, so there's no confusion. You'll also notice that I've already fitted the bearings. Again, I've done it all out of order because I lost the video. So the next video after this one will actually show you fitting the actual bearings themselves. You'll also notice on all of these I've got various numbers. They refer to the 590 is 590 grams for the actual rod. Number 8 is rod number 8, piston is piston number 8. 402 is how heavy the actual piston was. The pins all came in at the same weight, so I didn't have to worry about those. So the spread on weights of the conrods went from 587 to 590, so that was within 3 grams. And the pistons went from 402 up to 404, so that was within a couple of grams. So by taking a heavy rod and a light piston, I was able to match them all, if memory tells me, within about plus or minus 1 gram. So I was quite happy with that. The other choice was to start filing and grinding bits off of the rods and pistons, and I didn't fancy doing that. So that's where we're at. So the next stage then is going to be fitting the bearings. Right, to do the bearing clearance on the big ends, we start off with the actual bearings themselves, and both shells are the same, so there's a hole on both of them. Again, it's important that everything is super clean, so we start off by giving a clean where the bearing is going to fit. And we do that on the other half of the shell. Remember, when you come to put these together, they're matched and they'll only go one way. And the way to do that is, if you look at the end, you'll find there's a number engraved in there. And you'll find there's also a number engraved on the other half. And you'll find that those numbers will match each other. I also write on the other side the rod number and a 1 and a 1, because it's not always easy to see the actual writing itself. So you've cleaned up the rod ends. So the next job now is to clean up the bearing. Again, we've cleaned both sides. As before, it's probably best if you wear gloves. As you can see, there's some coating that's coming off. That's put on during manufacture. Same as the big ends, these have a tang in them. If you look at the end, you'll find there's a tang. Just raise the camera a bit. There we go. You can see there's a tang. So line it up with the tang, put your finger on the top so it's level, and then gently push down. Then push down with your finger and have a feel. You don't want anything showing proud, so if this is slightly proud, just tap it gently. Until it's smooth both sides. And then we do exactly the same on the cap. Look for the tang mark. And the same with the bearing. Line it up, slide it down. And again, make sure that it's flush on both sides. And push down firmly. So we're now in a position where we can actually mount the piston into the block, which is the next job we'll do. Right, so I've turned the engine upside down. This is where we're going to insert the pistons. We do it with no rings on, as we're only going to be checking clearances. So it's nice and much easier to slide the piston in and out. So we turn the engine upside down. We turn the crank so that the big ends for number 1 and number 5 is pointing up, easy to get to. We've labelled it, so this is number 1. This is conrod 1, piston 1, arrow pointing forwards. So that's the front of the engine. So we gently load it up. Drop the piston in and slowly push him up, and then taking hold of the conrod, bring it up slowly until we touch the bottom of the crank. Now at this point, have your plaster gauge ready. We're just going to put a small piece right across the top, because we're going to be doing piston number 5 at the same time. Also, you should have made sure that the actual crank is clean. And we'll put a bit of assembly lube just to hold it in position. And lay on your plaster gauge. Take the cap. While you hold the piston up hard against the bearing, just gently lower the cap on. Jiggle him around a bit. And then drop the bolts in. Right, so you fitted the end cap. So now we're going to add the bolts. Make sure you put a bit of the ARP lubricant, a little bit on the threads and under the head. And drop the bolt in. Just doing that hand tight, keeping the rod against the bearing, against the crank, should I say. We do the same with the other bolt. Going under the head, a little bit on the rod, and a little bit on the threads. And then keep the rod up against the crank, and then we just nip these down. Do about a quarter to half a turn each side as it pulls the cap down. And before we torque it down, we're going to load the other one in from the other side. I'll explain the reason why in a moment. So I'll go ahead and do that. But I'm now going to fit the number 5 piston, which is the corresponding number 1. Again, arrow pointing forwards. It's going to come this side, so we want the flat surface against the flat and the chamfer against the chamfer. So exactly as before, we offer him up. Help the piston in. And guide the rod up. It's nice sound as it clinks against the crank. And we add our cap. Again, make sure the numbers line up. In this case, I'm going to have to move the plastic gauge because I don't have it in the right place. It wants to go opposite. So I'll just move that over. It wants to go 90 degrees to where the cap is. So that's straight down there. Drop the cap on. Then take the bolts, which I've already put the ARP lubricant on. And again, we just want to snug these up. You don't want to rotate the crankshaft because that will destroy where the plastic gauge is. So I'm being super careful. Now the reason I put both in is when you come to tighten up big end bolts, you put a force on the actual rod itself. Now if this rod wasn't there, that would tend to flick it and possibly start to elongate the bearings. The same if you do this one up or do any of them up, so it's best to have a block in there, i.e. the other one, which helps. Right, so the next job then is to do up these to the required torques, which I'll just check what they are. Right, the actual torque settings, as these are 7/16 ARP 8740 bolts. The torque setting they quote is 63 foot-pounds. So my first one is I'm going to take them up to 22. Be careful here that we don't rotate the crank. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this. Don't quite know what to hang on to stop the crank moving. Seem to be okay at the moment. Alright, now I'm going to set it to 50. I'll just set my torque wrench up to 50. Now that's the torque wrench now set to 50. So we'll take them now to 50. Again, try not to rotate the crank. First one done. Second one done. Right, I'll now back them off and we'll measure what the gauge says. Again, we need to be careful we don't rotate the crank, otherwise we'll undo everything we tried to do. That's number one off. Right, the next task is to separate them. There's a number of ways of doing this. What I like to do is tap the piston away gently from the rod itself, and hopefully that won't squish out the bearing, but I'm not entirely sure. Other ways perhaps is to tap it, I don't know. Alright, so we need to just tap the piston gently, which I will get a suitable tool to do that. So using something plastic, so it's a plastic ended screwdriver. I got my knee underneath, so that if the piston drops out, it doesn't drop onto the floor. You see the cap is now starting to open up. And then we can now wiggle him a little bit, I hope. And perhaps another little tap on the piston. Right, well, we're out, and I'm now holding the piston in with my knee, which is why I put my knee there. We can then slide him out of the way, put him back where he belongs, and we can see what we've got. Now, using our gauge, I can see that I've got less than 2 and slightly greater than 1.5. So it's about 1.6, I would guess, which I'm more than happy with. So I'm not going to want to check the others. I will just knock this one out though. Right, taking that one out. And again, if we measure up, we've actually got, make sure we're on the thigh side. So it's less than 2.5, less than 2, and this one's also coming in at about 1.5, maybe 1.4. So again, happy with that. I mean, that should be correct because that's as it's come from Eagle themselves. Right, so we're now going to clean this off, boil them up, put the pistons back in, and we're going to slowly rotate and work out how much material we have to remove because we've got a stroker crank.